Good evening, everyone. My name is Steve Johnson, and on behalf of the Conejo Open Space Foundation, I want to welcome you to tonight's presentation, our second webinar of the 2023 speaker series entitled Water, Where It Comes From, Where It Goes, and Why It Matters. We're very happy that you are all joining us tonight for this exciting and important presentation. I'm sure many of you are familiar with our work, but for those of you who aren't, as an all-volunteer nonprofit organization, the Conejo Open Space Foundation focuses on educating our local community, the Conejo Valley, about our outdoor spaces. We also focus on raising funds to support programs and initiatives related to keeping those areas protected and accessible. Each year, we host this speaker series to help bring interesting and informative information and speakers to all of you on topics related to our beautiful Conejo Valley. As another example of one of the many ways we make a difference, we'd like to share the exciting news that we will soon be awarding this year's Conejo Open Space Foundation's Environmental Studies Scholarships to local area students. In addition to continuing the $1,000 scholarships we awarded over the past few years, we will be awarding new scholarships that have the potential to cover all 4 years in college for new awardees this year. We had a record number of applicants, and we're glad to be able to support the next generation of open space advocates. Look for more information to come soon on who those talented awardees will be. As the foundation's treasurer this year, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Calleguas Municipal Water District for their support for tonight's talk, the City of Thousand Oaks for their ongoing support of our events programming, and also especially to thank the many donors joining us tonight. Whether you contributed because of this event or are an annual donor, your donations are making a major impact in the work that we do. Please continue to keep the Conejo Valley open space in your philanthropic plans and reach out to us anytime. And it's almost time to move on to our program tonight, but before we do, let me share a few housekeeping items. Note that all attendees are muted for the duration of the presentation. The presentation will be roughly 45 minutes with an opportunity for questions afterwards. My fellow board member, Ann Russell, is with us tonight and will be moderating the Q&A for us this evening. We welcome your questions submitted at any time during the presentation with the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen. The chat function has been disabled for this event. We're also recording this event so you can rewatch or share with your friends. It takes us about a week to get this up on our website, COSF.org, but we will let you know when that happens. Our speaker this evening is Jennifer Lancaster, Principal Resource Specialist at Calleguas Municipal Water District. Ms. Lancaster received her Bachelor of Science degree in biology from the University of California, Riverside, and her Master of Science in biology from California State University, Northridge. She began her career as a biological science technician for the National Park Service and has also taught at Moorpark and Pierce colleges. She has been with Calleguas Municipal Water District since 2019. Hang on a second, and I will switch to Jennifer. Jennifer, would you turn on your video, please? You got it. Okay. There you go, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that introduction, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. I am going to share my screen. All right. Are you seeing that? Great. Thank you. So tonight I'm going to talk about water, where it comes from, where it goes, and why it matters. So just to give you a little overview of where the talk is going, I will start out with an introduction to Calleguas Municipal Water District and talk a little bit about water in Ventura County, both the demands and the sources, and then kind of zoom into water in the Calleguas service area. And then I'll talk about a phenomenon that we're starting to hear a lot more about, which is weather whiplash. and specifically how we have very recently switched from a pretty extreme drought condition to some heavy rains, and what that means for water resiliency moving into the future, and how we can all work together at various levels to build resiliency. And I'll also present some resources available to you through the district and our partners. So Calleguas is a wholesale water provider. So many people haven't heard of us, though we do end up supplying about 75% of Ventura County, either in whole or in part of your potable water supply. So we were formed in 1953 by the local communities because periods of drought are nothing new in our area. And back then, the area was rapidly developing and there was a dry period. And so the local communities realized that we needed a supplemental supply of water, and Calleguas was formed. And we found that supplemental supply in 1960 when we joined Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. And you can see there's our service area in yellow there. We cover southeastern Ventura County. And again, we are an imported water wholesaler. We primarily serve water from the State Water Project. And we have 19 retail water agencies and cities that serve about 640,000 people, or about 75% of Ventura County. We're a special district governed by a 5-member elected board, and we have about 70 employees. So looking at water demand in Ventura County, the overall water demand can be broken down into the water used for agriculture and then the water used for cities. And when we talk about cities, we mean residential, commercial, industrial, and institutional uses. So not surprising, agriculture is a huge part of Ventura County economy, and as such, utilizes about 57% of the water used in the county, with cities going for about 43%. And the sources of water in the county include groundwater and surface water, which are the two main sources for agriculture. And there's also imported water, which is served by Calleguas, and some recycled water. But if you look at the Calleguas service area and the water that we supply, it's a pretty different mix. So about 95% of the imported water supplied by Calleguas goes to cities, with only about 5% going to agriculture. The retail agencies that we serve, some of them have some groundwater that they also blend, others do not. So we have varying levels of dependency in terms of our retail purveyors. And then there is some recycled water in the service area as well. But I'll focus on potable water because Calleguas does not actually produce and distribute recycled water, though some of our retailers do. So this again is showing the Calleguas service area. And we think of our service area as split into an upper zone and a lower zone, with the upper zone being Simi Valley and Thousand Oaks, the Conejo Valley, and the lower zone being the Oxnard Plain, Camarillo, and Moorpark. So our retail agencies in the upper zone have very little, if any, access to groundwater. And so they are almost entirely dependent on our imported water to serve their potable demand. And these numbers here on this slide include non-potable. So if you look at just potable water, for example, Thousand Oaks is 100% dependent on imported water from Calleguas. But as you move into the Oxnard Plain, there is groundwater available out there. And so those agencies have varying blends that they serve. They do still need a substantial amount of imported water, though, to supplement what's available through groundwater, as well as to blend for water quality purposes. We tend to have high salinity in the groundwater out in this area. And so that imported water helps blend down that salinity so that water quality standards could be met. So as I mentioned, Calleguas is one of 26 member agencies of the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. And this map shows metropolitan service area. They serve about 19 million people. They're the largest wholesale water provider in the nation. And Calleguas is in the kind of medium blue color all the way up at the northwest tip of the Met service area. So we're the northwesternmost agency, and we're the only Met member agency that serves Ventura County. So Metropolitan has a number of different sources of water. Primarily, it imports water from the Northern Sierra through the State Water Project, as well as the Colorado River through the Colorado River Aqueduct. And this gives you a more detailed idea of Metropolitan's water sources. So about 30% of all the water Metropolitan serves to all of its member agencies comes from the State Water Project in the Northern Sierra. We're going to talk a lot more about the State Water Project in the coming slides. About 25% of Metropolitan's water comes from the Colorado River. And then the remaining 45% is made up of what Metropolitan considers local supplies. So those are like real local supplies like groundwater and recycling and desalination plants. But also Metropolitan considers the Los Angeles Aqueduct as a local supply because that is owned and operated by one of its member agencies, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, for LADWP's own use. And so since LADWP imports that water in and uses it themselves in the service area, it's considered a local supply under Met's portfolio. So Calleguas and some of the other member agencies in Metropolitan do not have equal access to all of Metropolitan's water sources. Calleguas is considered a State Water Project dependent agency. And the reason is because as Metropolitan's current distribution system is set up, there are constraints in our service area being able to receive water from the Colorado River. So very little of our water comes from the Colorado River. The vast majority comes from State Water Project. And we began receiving State Water Project water in 1972. We receive only full service treated water from Metropolitan, from the Jensen plant, and we don't operate and we don't receive raw water and then treat it ourselves. It's already fully treated when we receive it. We do have a water treatment plant at our Lake Bard reservoir facility, and we utilize that when we serve Lake Bard water because it's been in open air storage. But the water that is in Lake Bard started out as treated Met water. Another important point is that Calleguas maintains a single point of connection with Metropolitan, and that is at the Santa Susana Pass. We take our water right kind of at the boundary of Chatsworth going into Simi Valley. So we have a very large tunnel, the Santa Susana Tunnel, that goes through the Santa Susana Pass and parallels the 118 freeway. And then as it enters into Simi Valley, splits into our distribution center or system, and then is gravity fed down through our service area toward Oxnard. And so given that our service area is mostly, kind of downhill, we are able to generate hydroelectric power at several points along the system as water passively flows through our system. And we use that to offset some of the small amount of pumping that we do in order to lift water into certain neighborhoods that may be at higher elevation than the main distribution point that's nearby. So this graphic shows the long and complex route that our water takes to get to our tap. So here in the Conejo Valley, when we turn on our water, this is really where it's coming from. It's starting as snow up in the Sierra Nevada mountain range. And as it melts, it moves through the Feather River and into Lake Oroville, which is the largest reservoir on the State Water Project system. From Lake Oroville, it moves down through the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta and then eventually into the California Aqueduct. When it gets to the Tehachapi Mountains on its way down to Southern California, it has to be lifted up and over those mountains through the Edmonton pumping plant, which is actually the largest single lift pumping plant in the whole world. And it lifts that water almost 2,000 feet. And so that is a pretty enormous facility there. There are 14 pumps that are 80,000 horsepower each. And it uses about 45% of all the power that the whole State Water Project uses. And the whole State Water Project itself uses about 12% of all the electricity in the state. So this is a pretty enormous facility here, needed to get the water down to us in Southern California. So the California Aqueduct has 3 different branches. The coastal branch goes to San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara and terminates at Lake Cachuma. And the west branch is the one that we get our water through, and that branch comes down and ends at Castaic Lake. The eastern branch ends at Silverwood Lake and Lake Paris and serves the eastern end of metropolitan service area. So as our water enters into Castaic Lake, it is then, at that point, passes into metropolitan system, goes to the Jensen treatment plant in Granada Hills, and from there is dispersed to us here in Ventura County, as well as the San Fernando Valley and parts of Southwest Los Angeles. And again, as I mentioned, we do get a teensy bit of Colorado River aqueduct water here, but very little. Under normal operating conditions, almost none. During dry years, we can get maybe up to 15% of our supply through that system, but it's pretty rare. And then once the water gets into Calleguas' service area, we're serving it to 19 water retail agencies that again serve about 75% of Ventura County's residents. So now getting into the discussion of weather whiplash and what we have just experienced in the last several years. We are just coming out of one of the most severe droughts, or I would say the most severe drought that we have ever experienced at Calleguas as a district, and that has ever been experienced since the history of the State Water Project. So the years 2020 through 2022 were the driest 3 consecutive years on record. And the first 3 months of last year were the driest first 3 months on record. And that's really important because in California, the way our hydrology works is we accumulate most of our snowpack and precipitation during those months, January through March. That's kind of the height of when we're accumulating that. And we think of our snowpack as the state's largest drinking water reservoir because it sits up there in the Sierras. And as we enter into our hot, dry summers in California, where we see very little precipitation, at that time, the snowmelt is trickling in and feeding the reservoirs and serving us through the summer until the fall comes and the rains start up again, hopefully. And so to have such a hot and dry first 3 months of the year, coming on the heels of 2 already hot and dry years, we were in a very dire situation a year ago. If I had been talking to you like this a year ago, it would have been a very different tone. It was not good times. We were really in experiencing unprecedented strains on our water supply at that time. So because of all of this, we saw the lowest 3-year total deliveries that we've ever seen from the State Water Project. So the average expectation for the deliveries from State Water Project would be about 3.2 million acre feet. And the Department of Water Resources, who administers the project, their lowest forecast was 1 million acre feet. But in fact, what actually ended up being delivered was only 600,000 acre feet. And an acre foot of water, I'll be using that term a lot. That is a unit of measurement that we use when we're talking about these large volumes of water, but it really is just the amount of water that it would take to fill an acre of land 1 foot deep. And that's enough to serve about 3 or 4 residential homes for a year. So you can see right here, these photographs really give you an idea of how quickly this water situation can whiplash. This is a location called the Enterprise Bridge on one of the arms of Lake Oroville, again, the largest reservoir on the State Water Project. And it was looking great in 2019. That was a very wet year. And so the water levels were high, and you can see the reservoir looked good. And then you just move up to 2021, and you can see how low those water levels had gotten, that what we call the bathtub ring, where you can see just, where the normal water line would be and then how low it is. And then only a couple of months later, in July of 2021, even more, just down to a trickle. So it's pretty amazing how fast that can change. So this graph shows the Sierra snowpack over the last 20 years or so. And this is showing a trend in Sierra snowpack that is really translating to the resiliency of the State Water Project. So you can see 2023 through about 2012, about half of those years were above historic average and about half were below. So really kind of trending along like it always had been. But if you look at the most recent 10 years period, you can see that only, well, not counting this year, but prior to that, only 2 years exceeded the historic average for April 1st average snowpack. We measure it at April 1st because that's the point that we expect the snowpack to be the deepest. It's before the snowmelt has really gotten started, but it's after all the winter storms are pretty much done. So not only do we have more years that were coming in below average in the snowpack, they were significantly below average. So this overall trend of decreasing Sierra snowpack really translates to decreasing reliability on the State Water Project. And then of course, we know that we got a lot of rain this year. So in case you're curious where we're at right now, for 2023, we're at 237% of average for the snowpack. So that's excellent news. But again, you can see that this is a trend in the downward direction. So for those agencies who are dependent on the State Water Project for pretty much all of their water supply, that is not good news. So we're not the only ones in that situation. There are 5 additional metropolitan member agencies that are considered State Water Project dependent. So that includes Las Virgenes Municipal Water District, as well as LADWP, Upper San Gabriel Valley, and then over in the Inland Empire, there's Three Valleys and Inland Empire Utilities Agency. These are the 6 State Water Project dependent agencies. And as we were going through the extreme dry period that we just lived through, that was affecting these 6 agencies disproportionately to the rest of Metropolitan, because the rest of Metropolitan still had access to the Colorado River sources, as well as the stored water in Diamond Valley Lake. And because of the plumbing issues, they couldn't get it up to us. I will say there's fixes for that are in development right now so that this won't ever happen again. But this is to kind of explain why we ended up in water restrictions last year. So there's a number of factors that goes into how much water we're going to get out of the State Water Project and how the Department of Water Resources, or DWR, figures that out each year. So I'll introduce you to a couple of terms first. One is Table A, water. There are 29 State Water Project contractors. Those are water agencies that have contracts with the state to receive water directly from the State Water Project. Metropolitan Water District is the largest of the state water contractors, and they have entitlement to about 2 million acre feet. So their Table A amount is about 2 million acre feet per year. And that's about 47% of what the State Water Project delivers at full capacity. So when we talk about State Water Project allocations, DWR looks at the amount of available water, and then they announce an allocation, which is a percentage of that total entitlement that they are going to be able to deliver in a given year. So they determine that by looking at the amount of snowpack in the Northern Sierra and how much of that they expect will turn into snowmelt runoff that enters into Lake Oroville. They look at rainfall runoff into Oroville, the flows in the Sacramento River, as well as Delta export. So as you probably are aware, the Delta is a very sensitive ecological area, and there is a lot of water that is required to be held back in the Delta for ecological benefits. And so there's a big balance and kind of a lot of entities that need water from the Delta. And so every year DWR has to look at how much can be allocated to each use. And so from there, they figure out how much can go into San Luis Reservoir, which would then translate into the California Aqueduct. And they come up with that percentage. So last year in March, following that very dry winter, DWR announced that the state water project allocation was only going to be 5%. So imagine getting 5% of your paycheck. This was not good news for those of us who rely on this as our primary source of water. And this chart gives you an idea of what historical deliveries have looked like on the state water project, dating back to 1996 or so. So you can see back in the late 90s, the state water project allocation was 100% pretty consistently. And then moving into the early 2000s, it did drop some, but was still fairly high. And I will make a note that Metropolitan can meet normal demands even if they get like 20 to 30% state water project allocation, just because they have a portfolio of additional uses or additional sources and things like that. So typically, even if you get a below 100% allocation, as long as it's not super low, it usually wouldn't translate to any kind of restrictions at the end user level. And so that's why we hadn't really heard anything like that previously. So if you look back, our previous drought before this most recent one was in the 2014 timeframe. And that was the first time state water project allocation was ever 5%. That was the first single digit allocation in that drought. Then there was a bit of a rebound on the system. And then again, remember 2020 was dry, 2021. So not only did we get a 5% allocation last year, that was a consecutive to the previous year, which was also 5%. So there was another record broken here. First time ever seeing back-to-back single-digit allocations. And just as a note, because of all the rains we've recently had, DWR has announced a 100% allocation for 2023, which is the first time we've seen that since 2006. So that was excellent news. But again, another whiplash where we go from extremely low to full allocations just in a year period. I'll go back one. Again, the point I want to make here is the state water project's reliability over time we're seeing is declining. So with that 5% announcement, Metropolitan determined that there would not be enough water to meet normal demands in the state water project dependent areas for the rest of 2022, and that substantial reduction in demands would be necessary. So on April 26, Metropolitan's board approved a mandatory conservation program for all of the state water project dependent areas, including Calleguas in our service area. And we're a wholesaler, so we don't implement those things at the end user level. So the next day our board passed those requirements through to our retail water providers. And June 1st, 2022 is when compliance period began. That is when we went to 1 day a week, or 1 day a week outdoor irrigation. That's what we were limited to back then. So the Emergency Water Conservation Program focused on outdoor water use, and it stipulated that if the conservation goals were not achieved with 1 day a week watering, then a no outdoor watering at all mandate would have to be imposed to continue to drive those demands down to meet the small supply that we were able to get last year. So this time last year, we were talking to people about prioritizing what water they did get for outdoor irrigation and using it for their trees and their high value plantings and trying to keep those alive through this dry period. So why did we focus on outdoor irrigation for this conservation program? There's a lot of water used outdoors on the landscape. In our service area, it ranges from 40 to 70%. So in the Conejo Valley and Simi Valley, that's our warmer, more inland areas of our service area. Those numbers are close to 70%. And that's a lot. So that was an area that we could target where we could get a lot of savings fairly easily. Replacing turf, Metropolitan has done some studies and found that replacing turf saves about 44 gallons of water per square foot each year. And there's still a lot of turf in the service area. And turf grass takes a lot of water in and of itself, but it's also often irrigated very inefficiently. We've all seen people run their sprinklers and the water just run down the gutter or spray all over the sidewalk or the driveway, or there's broken sprinkler heads that waste a lot of water before they're noticed. And so thirsty lawns plus inefficient irrigation accounts for most of the outdoor water use. And so that was why outdoor water use is really the target. It's still what we consider a low-hanging fruit in terms of water savings in our service area. So under the Emergency Water Conservation Program, how did we do? We did great. It was very successful at 1 day a week watering. Collectively, all the state water project dependent agencies were able to come in right at the target that Metropolitan set. So we in fact were about 3% under. So that was excellent news. We never had to escalate to additional restrictions. We were able to get by with the 1 day a week watering, and that was effective. And just to give you a little perspective on how much water we really did save, that purpley shaded area is the amount of water that we would have used under normal demand if we had had no restrictions going on. So that was a substantial cut from normal demand there. So everybody really pulled together and did an excellent job. And we're very grateful for all the work that went into this and the sacrifices, frankly, that we know were made in order to achieve this. So here's where we get to the whiplash part. This graph is a lot going on, so I'll talk you through it. It's okay. We call this the 8-station index, and this is a cumulative total of precipitation that's measured on a water year basis. So we've got a bunch of different years on here, so different lines. And those 8 stations are across the Northern Sierra, so they give a good idea on how much is being accumulated that ultimately sources the state water project. So the blue shaded area would be average, historical average precipitation. And so if a given year's line is within that blue area, then it's below average. If it's above it, it's above average. So you can see those years ending 2020, 2021, and 2022, all 3 of them below average. And so, you know, one dry year is usually not difficult to get through because we have storage and we have other things. But as you start to accumulate dry year after dry year after dry year, that's when it starts to put us into these situations that are a lot more serious. So, I'll also note that water years are measured starting on October 1st. So a water year runs from October 1st through September 30th. So here we are currently. I know it probably seemed, it seemed to me, and it probably seemed to many people that we broke a bunch of precipitation records this year. You know, we did break certain snowpack records in certain areas at certain times, but overall, if you look at the cumulative occurrence, accumulation of precipitation, we're not like off the charts this year. It was definitely enough to turn around that dry spell that we had been experiencing. But you can see we're still actually under 2018, 2019, and well under 2016, 17, which was the wettest year that we have here on this chart. But as of a couple of days ago, we are at 122% of average. So that is definitely welcome given what we have just lived through. So given all the atmospheric rivers that we experienced and all the precipitation that we accumulated kind of in the perfect way, and with the cool temperatures this year, which has allowed us to maintain that snowpack longer into the summer than we were worried that we would see. We thought it might warm up earlier and that we'd see a massive snow melt with lots of flooding, but so far that didn't materialize because the temperatures did remain cooler, and so the snow melt has been a lot more gentle than I think we were fearing. Also, a lot of water agencies heeded the call that there is a surplus on the system, and so everybody is rapidly taking water and putting it into storage wherever they can right now. So that's helping to kind of wick some of this surplus off the system as well. So that emergency water conservation program was rescinded in March of 2023, and we are no longer under any kind of watering restrictions mandated by Calleguas and Metropolitan. You still, depending on where you live, may have watering guidelines that are imposed on by your own retail agencies, but there's no 1 day a week mandates anymore coming down from the wholesale level. So again, here's our favorite location to look at these water levels, Enterprise Bridge. This again, it's just always striking to me how quickly these water levels can fluctuate. So just 6 months ago, back in December, you can see that Enterprise Bridge was looking pretty pitiful. The bathtub ring was huge. The water was just a little trickle underneath the bridge. And now, a couple of weeks ago, Lake Oroville is now at full capacity. And we're back to seeing that water all the way up to the top and very close to the bottom of the bridge. And just remarkable how this system has fluctuated just over a 6-month period. So as I mentioned, there's a surplus of water on the system now. And so Metropolitan is definitely taking advantage of that in many different ways. There's a number of different ways that Met has to store water and to bank it for future years, because we know that we're going to have another dry year, probably sooner than later, just the way climate change has been materializing and just the patterns we've seen in the last 10 years. We know to expect this. So Met is storing water every which way, everywhere they can, and its member agencies, including Calleguas, is storing water as much as we can as well. So water that we took out of our own storage systems to get us through last year, we now have that excess water available to us, and we're replacing it and filling our bank account, so to speak, back up to the top. So that brings us into this climate whiplash term that you probably have heard and will probably begin to hear more, climate whiplash or weather whiplash, because the term drought really no longer fits this pattern that we see. We are kind of in a mega drought. We're in an extended drying period. If you remember the graphs I showed earlier, the trend is less accumulation of snowpack in the Northern Sierras, hotter and drier years that are coming more frequently and more severe. And so we kind of are in this mega drought type of a situation with some very wet years interspersed in between. And so these extremes are becoming more extreme and they're becoming more frequent. So we are now thinking, we need to think about change and how are we going to think about water reliability for the future? And that really also boils down to how do we use water and how do we value water? So we're moving from talking about drought to really talking about change. And so we like to say rain is good, snow is better, but change is best. Because if we change, for example, our outdoor landscapes, which currently is utilizing the most water in our service area, if we swap out those thirsty lawns for more climate appropriate landscaping, we can really not only use less water overall on these landscapes, we can also better weather those dry periods because climate appropriate landscaping is better adapted to get through dry and hot periods. So Calleguas is embarking on a new water awareness campaign, and we're calling it The Landscape is Change. And this is, our water landscape has changed. And although cycles of drought are nothing new to California, the way that the Sierra snowpack is accumulated and the way it melts, that is changing. And because of this, the landscape of the snowpack on the Sierra Nevada has changed, and that impacts the water supplies provided by the State Water Project. So our own landscapes must change. So since we use so much water on our outdoor landscapes, that really is the easiest place for us to start making a difference and building that resiliency. And I might add, in a beautiful way. I think a lot of these landscapes are very beautiful and they have multi-benefits. I mean, I know I'm talking to an audience that already really understands this, but for everything from pollinators to the benefits to our watersheds without having pesticides and fertilizers running off of big lawns. We've got climate appropriate landscaping that doesn't need any of that, captures water on site. There really is a multi-benefit approach to changing the landscape. So underpinning all of this is that our water values are changing. I think we historically have thought of water as very plentiful and cheap, and we just turn on the spigot or we turn on the spout and it all comes out and we just have as much as we need. And so when that's the idea about water, we don't really value it that much. It's plentiful, it's abundant. But I think we have to understand that that's not the case. Water is extremely valuable and it's becoming less plentiful and abundant as we move into the future. And so we need to figure out better ways to utilize it and to respect it and to value it. So changing how we use and value our water today ensures that our communities continue to thrive into the future. So to that end, we have developed a lot of resources to help support people in switching their landscapes out for climate appropriate landscaping. And one such resource is our Garden Landscapes for Ventura County. This is our guidebook we've recently released. It's an ecosystem approach to creating a thriving and water-wise garden landscape. So we have this available on our website digitally. It's at the link below here, but I think hopefully we can distribute a link to our website afterward. You could get the digital version. If you come to any of our events, we also have hard copy versions. And I'll give my contact information at the end. If you would like a hard copy version, just reach out to me and I'll make sure you get one. But really this guidebook kind of helps you think about a yard transformation in a holistic way and to plan it out in a way that's going to be successful and have the best chance of thriving in your own particular yard. Because if you're in the Conejo Valley, you're probably going to have very different microclimate conditions than if you're in Camarillo or in Oxnard. And so considering all of those things before you plant really will help you with a more successful project. As a companion to our guidebook, we have been offering a series of garden landscapes for Ventura County workshops. We have already done the first 2 of them, but we have the last one coming up Saturday, July 15th. The topic is right plant, right place. So as I was talking about, this is really going to focus on how to choose the best plants for your own unique yard that are going to thrive there. And these are in-person free classes, but please do register ahead of time because space is limited. So we do want to keep track of how many people are showing up. And they're located at the Calleguas offices. We're up there on Olson Road in Thousand Oaks, right on the border of Simi Valley. Another resource is this website, VenturaCountyGardening.com. The Calleguas co-sponsors with a number of other water agencies, many of which are our own retail purveyors. But this website is really great. It's got all kinds of garden inspiration photos and virtual tours to really get you inspired for all the different looks and all the different plant palettes that work as climate appropriate. There's species accounts and plant profiles, and you can even compile your own list and save the ones you're interested in. And there's resources on maintenance and irrigation, watering, as well as how-to guides on how to get rid of your lawn and plant a new garden. There's also a number of rebate opportunities that you can take advantage of, and these are all accessed through bewaterwise.com. So you can get a rebate for removing your irrigated turf and replacing it with climate appropriate landscaping. I think it's currently at $2 a square foot, but do check back because periodically the program gets some grant funding and it might bump the dollar amount up a little bit here and there. But right now I think it's $2. And if you're interested in doing this, please do check out all the terms and conditions first, because there are some requirements for your project to be eligible for the rebate. One of which that's very important is that you not start your project before you apply. So you have to apply, get a reservation first, and then start your project. So make sure you understand all of that before you do anything. And then that way you can remain eligible for your rebate. You can also get rebates for devices. So if you need a new toilet or washing machine or weather-based irrigation controller, or you buy a rain barrel, those things are all have rebates available on them. So also go through bewaterwise.com, and then you can check out all the available rebates. And I would say, similar to the turf program, do check this before you buy your device, because for example, clothes washers and toilets, there's an eligible model list. So you need to make sure that the one that you're going to buy is on that eligible list in order to get that rebate. So know that ahead of time before you go out to buy it. So I talked a lot about what individuals can do in terms of, lowering their water demand and building resiliency for the future. And a lot of that is focused on the outdoor landscaping and using water efficient devices when you're changing those out. But what is Calleguas doing at the district level to build resiliency? Well, there's not one silver bullet, as you probably know. It's going to be a portfolio approach to moving into the future. And there are a number of projects that we have already done. We've got projects in process, we've got projects in the planning stages, and then we have a lot of kind of research that we're doing on things that we could potentially do in the future. So we have our existing Las Posas Aquifer Storage and Recovery Project. That is a well field that we maintain out near Moore Park, and that is really like an underground reservoir that we keep. So we inject imported water into the aquifer for underground storage, and then we can pull it out in times of emergency or a drought. So this is not utilizing groundwater because it is imported water that we injected previously. And we did use the Las Posas Aquifer Storage and Recovery Project to supplement our supplies last year while we were in the Emergency Water Conservation Program. So as I mentioned, with the surplus now available, we are refilling that aquifer storage project and replacing what we took out last year to get us through that dry period. Metropolitan, I'll mention Metropolitan is working on fixes in the distribution system to help boost more water into the state water project dependent areas, including our service area and Las Virgenes's. And so there's a series of those projects, some of which are farther along than others, with the goal that what happened last year not ever happen again. We have interconnection with Las Virgenes, our neighbor, that's in progress. And if you live in Oak Park or you drive on Lindero Canyon Road, I am very, very sorry, that's us, all that construction. I also thank you very much for your patience, but this is an exceptionally important project because this is going to allow us to interconnect with our neighbor and help each other out in times of emergency. If we have an emergency on our system, Las Virgenes can supply us, and vice versa. If they have an emergency, we can supply them. So building these connections so that we don't have these little isolated systems unto themselves is very critical in helping with regional resiliency. Similarly, we have an interconnection in the works with the city of Ventura. That one will also be a source of emergency water supply for Calleguas, but this one's a little different because the city of Ventura is actually a state water project contractor themselves. They have a fairly small allocation, but they are a contractor nonetheless, but they have no infrastructure to deliver that water to them. And so this interconnection, in addition to being an emergency interconnection, will also allow the city of Ventura to get their state water project water wheeled through the Calleguas system so that they can finally access that water that they have entitlement to. We're also building and developing local and regional partnerships so that we can advance our local resource development. So many of these local projects are large and expensive, and the more parties that can come together to develop them and benefit from them, the better we are on a region level. So there's a number of those that are in the works and in development. And then the district also invests in water use efficiency incentives. Back last year during the drought, our board authorized us to utilize $2 million to supplement the turf replacement rebate and add an extra $1 during that period of time. And so that was wildly successful, and we have pretty much spent and reserved all of that money, which is why it's back down to $2 a square foot. But we do invest in as many water use efficiency incentives as we can to help with demand hardening. So with all of that, this is my contact information. I am more than happy to talk to you about any of these topics and answer your questions and help connect you with any of these programs or resources that I talked about. So feel free to reach out. And with that, I think we can maybe move into questions. I'll stop sharing.
Jennifer, thank you very much for the overview of our intricate and complicated water system and for the water conservation resources you've described. Thanks for dedicating your time to help educate us. Now for our Q&A. Anne, would you like to ask Jennifer some of the questions from our attendees?
Yes, thank you. That was a great presentation, and we got some really interesting questions. One of the first ones was about whether agricultural customers are treated differently, whether they face the same kind of restrictions when there's a shortage of water, and whether they pay the same kind of rates.
That's a great question. Again, our imported water, very little of it actually goes to agriculture. And the reason is because our water is much more expensive. It's imported, it's treated, and it costs a lot more than they pay to utilize groundwater. So That in and of itself makes our water not very attractive. But in addition to that, the treatment that we do to make it potable sometimes is not the best for the agricultural crops. And so that's why we have such little going to them. And I will say those water restrictions we went through last year were unprecedented. We never had that before. And our agricultural customers were actually able to roll off our system completely during that time period. And they didn't use any of our water. It just only went to potable water uses and residential and commercial uses during that time frame.
Okay, and so in the water use scenario in residential, what is the deal with swimming pools? Were there any restrictions put on swimming pools? Should there be any restrictions put on swimming pools?
Well, that's an interesting question. And given, the fact that we're a wholesale water agency, we don't have jurisdiction to really tell anybody what they can and can't do with swimming pools and such. So that really lies with the local jurisdictions and the cities. And so I do know that many of our cities did put restrictions on swimming pools during that time. We all are required by the state to have a water shortage contingency plan. And so that water shortage contingency plan has multiple levels that go in with increasing shortage levels. And each level has a pre-planned suite of things, that restrictions and things that go into effect as each level is incurred. So most of our retail providers have restrictions on swimming pools associated with the increasing levels in the water shortage contingency plan, which we were all at high levels last year. And so that's where those restrictions came in. They won't look the same from city to city because, again, it's really dependent on who serves you your water.
Now, one question came in about, and I'm guessing the answer is going to be financial, but how do you communicate with people who simply think that climate change is not happening? I'm guessing that as your water costs more, it doesn't really matter whether climate change is happening or not, because you're going to have to take action regardless of what you think the fundamental problem is, right?
Right. I mean, that's exactly right. Whether you attribute these changes to climate change or not, the fact of the matter is we've seen the data. The reliability of the state water project is getting less and less. The snowpack is accumulating and running off differently than it ever has in the past. And so regardless of what you attribute that to, we just need to adapt to that as our new reality and think about how we build resiliency to deal with that as we continue to move into the future.
And what about communicating with, this is also a question about educating the public. What about communicating with the owners of multifamily dwellings and also with HOAs? Because both of those sort of operate as their own little independent municipalities, whether they're within a city or not. Is there any kind of outreach to those specific entities?
Yeah, our retail agencies typically handle that because they have all the account information. And, as a wholesaler, we don't have access to those kinds of information. So our role as a wholesaler, we tend to help support our retailers with anything that they need in terms of this outreach, but it's a challenge. And, I'm involved in many different water use efficiency groups with many different agencies across Southern California, many of which are retailers, and they themselves, even though they send a bill, they talk about how difficult it can be to connect with the right person, because oftentimes it's a property management company that may actually even be out of state. And so it can be really hard to get that, the right connections. And so that is an area of active effort where we are collaborating on how we can develop best practices and really increase the effectiveness of outreach to HOAs.
Yeah, I would imagine that is probably pretty hard. Are they eligible for that same kind of rebate that goes to the individual homeowner? Okay.
Absolutely.
So that's
they're considered commercial. So if anybody on this call happens to be on an HOA board, when you go to bewaterwise.com and you look at the rebates and the turf program, just click commercial, because multifamily common areas fall under that bucket, but you're still eligible for the exact same benefits.
Oh, okay. That's good news.
Yeah.
Now we have a question about why, and I did notice this last year because I live in LA County, but most of our viewers are probably coming in from Ventura County. Why were the restrictions different? Why were they stricter in Ventura County than they were in LA County?
Yeah, this was a problem. So the reason really, so if you're in LA County in Las Virgenes' service area, you definitely experience the exact same thing that Ventura County experienced. I think what you're referring to is probably LADWP's service area. So if you're out in the valley, the reason being is that LADWP has additional sources of water. They have the Los Angeles Aqueduct. They also have only the San Fernando Valley part of their service area is technically state water project dependent. The rest of the city of LA has more access to that Colorado. So they were able to do more of a balancing act within their agency. And so I think they ended up at the worst of it at 2 days a week watering.
Right, it was 2 days a week. Yeah. Exactly.
A third consideration is that LADWP has a lot more multifamily housing than we have out here. So single family residential, there's a lot more yard area per person out in this area. When you think about multifamily housing, there's a lot less area per person. And so they, had a less demand on that side just off the bat. So given all of those factors, they decided that they would go to 2 day a week watering, and that they would stay within their volumetric limit that was imposed by Metropolitan, and they were able to do so. But it did create confusion, and it made it a little more difficult for the residents out here who rightly were asking that same question. How come we only get 1 day a week and they get 2? That's why.
Yeah, I remember at the time that there seemed to be a lot of ill feeling over that issue, that like somehow the valley was sucking up all the water or whatever. We have a question about other kinds of disasters besides climate disaster, which is a sudden disaster, which is earthquake. In a major earthquake, how prepared are you to deliver water to customers? I mean, how much of a problem is that going to be?
Well, we plan, we have in our service area between our Lake Bard, which is behind me right here, and our aquifer storage and recovery, we have the ability to serve our demands for 6 months on an emergency basis. Oh. That would be assuming our Santa Susana tunnel was cut off from Metropolitan for 6 months. Now having these interconnections, once those are completely built, that's going to help prolong the amount of water that we could potentially serve. But with all of our modeling scenarios, 6 months was the amount of time that we thought was very conservative in looking at a total outage from Met. Likely we would be back online much sooner than that.
Okay, that's kind of reassuring. We have a question actually. The next question actually is about that Ventura interconnection. When that is completed, when that project is done, what does that mean for Ventura? Will there be excess water at that point? And what will happen to that?
I can't really answer that, given that I don't work for the city of Ventura, so I don't know exactly, but I do know that their state water project entitlement is actually quite small. It's not a huge volume of water. And so what that will do is, I think it can help them similarly, I know, to like the way our lower zone folks use our water. It can help them blend their additional water sources to meet water quality standards and things like that. They don't always have to take that water. That's available to them if they want it, but they're not automatically going to take the full amount every time. So it's another water source within the city's portfolio. But it's not really, given the volume, it's not going to create a sudden surplus of water in the city. It's just going to sort of fit in with what they're already doing.
Okay. So now I actually have two different rainwater questions here, which is anything being done to improve the efficiency of rainwater capture? And then also, let's see, is there anything that's really being done to educate people about rainwater capture and use in gardens and the rain barrels and so on? Two separate questions, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, on a macro level, rainwater capture is part of the whole wastewater system, and pretty much all of the wastewater that's generated in our upper zone goes and is processed and then goes down into the Camarillo area and then is utilized as recycled water. So that kind of goes all into that system. And then as far as rainwater capture on your individual properties, if you go through the turf replacement program, you're actually required to install a rainwater capture feature, whether that be a dry stream bed or a rain barrel or something like that. So that has to be an element of your project. We do have rain barrel sales periodically at the district. Our next ones are scheduled for the fall. And then of course, regardless of when and where you buy rain barrels, you can get a rebate on rain barrels through bewaterwise.com, and you can get that rebate on up to 2 rain barrels. And if you're really into it and you want a cistern, you can get rebates on cisterns too.
Oh, okay. Good to know.
Yeah.
That probably wraps it up for now. We have a question about, and Steve Johnson can maybe answer this. Is there a way for my friends who missed this event to watch it later? And this would also be helpful for the people who didn't get the website addresses and stuff.
Yes, this recording will be available in a week or so on the COSF.org, Conejo Open Space Foundation.org website. We will download it from Zoom and put it up there pretty quickly. So you can find this plus all of our previous recordings from previous outreach events on our website. And I'd like to also let you know that we will have our third, I think it's our third event later in the fall, another wildflower native plant palooza outreach event for the public. These are drought tolerant plants generally, and we have vendors, perhaps even the Calleguas Municipal Water District will be there to talk about conservation. That'll occur in, I believe, early October.
October 7th.
Yeah. Thank you, Ann. Thank you, Ann. So thanks for taking us through these thoughtful questions, Ann, and many thanks to Jennifer for your participation and to our attendees for the great questions. We appreciate and value the great work that you're doing every day, Jennifer. Thank you. And especially for taking the time out to educate us on the environment and our sources of water. So we hope that you'll take the time to stay engaged with us in the future. So thank you very much, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Our event has come to an end. I know I have a lot of takeaways from tonight, and I hope you do as well. If nothing else, I hope this webinar gave you the opportunity to stop and think a little bit more carefully about our water supply and how to conserve it. To all of our attendees tonight, I look forward to meeting you out on the trail, either hiking, biking, or on horseback. The spring wildflowers are pretty much done and transitioning to the summer wildflowers, but there's still a tremendous amount of greenery, flowers, and gorgeous animals out in our habitat. Please don't pick the wildflowers, however. Take lots of photos, and as our contests come up for you in the Conejo, please feel free to submit those photos to us for the contests. So thank you and enjoy our Conejo Valley. Please continue to be partners with us in the months to come. Thanks again for your donations, for your volunteerism and participation. And until next time, good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.